Welcome back to the Pegasus story. Tonight we're going to go on an adventure, and we're only going to take the oldest grandkids, the ones from up north. That would be Rachel and Zach and Luke and Demetra. So our story takes place on the island of ice. Once again, the children were they were in the car this time, in the van, and they were traveling to go skiing. So they were all thinking about the cold and the ice and how it was going to be so cold. And the adults, of course, were in the front seat just chattering away like crazy. And the kids were in the back all excited, talking about going downhill skiing. And this time it was Demetra. She looked up and she said, I see a light. What is going on? Is there a radio tower or something? Because it was light outside. Well, then the others looked up and realized that it was Pegasus coming. The light was coming, and just that quick, he was over the van, and the children were on his back. And once again, it was bitter cold outside, so they were in the bubble, very warm, and they all were excited, and they rubbed their faces in his mane, and he threw his head back, and they all laughed, and he began to take off as high and as fast as he could, and he got as high as he could, and then he did a loop, came around. The children were just squealing with delight, and here they're older, they're older kids, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. And so of course they said, where are we going? And he said, oh, tonight I'll tell you, we're going to the island of the ice. So away they went, north, 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 further north, and they saw a very, very, very large lake. And he said, this is it. Well, in the middle of this lake was a mountain, came clear up high to a peak, but the mountain was jagged. It had layers down to it. And then there was a very large beach. Of course, there was snow on the ground everywhere. So he came down and he landed on a flat spot very near the peak of the mountain, in the middle of this ice lake that's, of course, frozen over. And the children slid down his wing, down into the soft snow that puffed up all around them. And it was pretty exciting because they could run in it and fall, and nobody got hurt. And they said, well, gee, we're just here on the top of the mountain. He said, you'll figure it out. And away he went. So they started to walk around the mountain, around the side of the top of this mountain, and just around the corner where they couldn't see before was a real smooth, like a line in the mountain. So as they got closer, they realized that it was actually a slide. And it was just as smooth and as silk as it could be. And they didn't have to climb up to the top of it because they were already there. And they could see that it went down and down the side of the mountain. And so they jumped on this slide, and away they went just as fast as they could. And they had lots of winter gear on, so they were puffed up with their snow pants and their hats and gloves and everything to keep them very, very warm. And down this slide they went, one right after another, just as fast as they could. Then when they begin going too fast, then the mountain would kind of slide back up and slow them down. And they just giggled and screamed and just had the best time, moving as fast as you can imagine with the mountain sliding past them. And then after a little while, they came upon a plateau. Now they're still high up on the mountain, but it dumped them out. The slide widened out, and down they went, and they all ended up side by side into a big puff of white snow. They came out all laughing because they looked like snow ghosts, and they started brushing the snow off of them. And one of them said, look, we're at the tree line. Look, there's trees over there. And that's what there were. There were trees that they call them snow ghosts. They were just coated with snow, and they were evergreens. And so as the snow was so heavy, it hung down. It hung down in the twilight, which was still sunlight, but they looked like ghosts. But they're really trees just saturated and covered and hanging low with snow. And then they looked past those, which were beautiful and haunting, and they saw other evergreens. But these were different because they were coated with ice, but not like a solid coat of ice. They had, of course, it was a tiered tree, and from the top down there were like icicles. And then as they met the whiter part, there would be another set of icicles. And they touched the tree, so they weren't pointed at the end. And then another tier, and it looked like a wedding cake. And it was a big tree. There were many of them, but one was especially big. And Luke said, "What is that? It looks like a light or something." And so they walked up to it, and lo and behold, there was a door. There was a door in this icicle tree. It was a real tree. They opened it up and went in, and there were people that lived on the mountain in there, and they said, "We've been waiting for you. We knew Pegasus was bringing you." They had hot cocoa, and they had popsicles, all kinds of things. You'd have thought they wouldn't want cold things, but they did. They had ices and ice cream, but they also had hot cocoa and sandwiches. And they sat down and they warmed up a little bit, and they got all excited because they said, "Oh, there's so much more to see." So the children then walked outside of this draped tree with all these icicles on it and went down, and there was another slide. It was a little wider, so the children decided to go two at a time down it, and down they went. And it went down, down, only this time it swirled. It went around in a circle, and then it would go up, so they'd slow down, then down again it would go until they reached another tier, and they, once again, it opened up wide, and down the slide they went, and they went into a big puff of snow so nobody was hurt, and they saw another forest. And this time the forest was trees with regular leaves, and some of them were very large leaves, some were small, but the entire trees were covered with clear ice. And there was something glistening underneath the trees. So they walked over to them, and there laying on the ground, and they could see some other ones sliding off, the trees had been coated with rain that froze, and it was clear ice. It made a total imprint, so it made a casting of the leaf. So the leaves then would slide down onto the snow and be fully intact. And like I say, some were as big as dinner plates, some were as small as saucers, some were as small as a tablespoon. But they were perfectly clear. They could hold them up and see the veins and the stems, and it was all an imprint or a casting of the leaves. So they started gathering up. A couple of children stuck some in their pockets. You know what's going to happen with those. And they played around the trees, gathering all different kinds of trees for quite a while. And leaves, I mean. And then back they went. There it is again, another slide. Oh, but this slide was so much fun because it was all the way across. So all the children, just the four of them, the big ones, and the reason it was only the big kids this time, because this could have been pretty dangerous, and Pegasus knew these guys would know what was dangerous and what was safe to do. Four across this slide was, they all jumped on and raced down the mountain as fast as they could. And sometimes they'd lay down or roll over and whatever and go faster and faster. And then they came to another plateau. And when they got there was a creek. And this creek was like none of they'd ever seen. It was wide and it had rocks on it. But on each of the rocks was a white flower. So one of them, Zach, walked out on the stones, and the water was running. It was ice cold, and he looked at these flowers, and they were like chrysanthemums. They had beautiful white petals just poking up towards the sky, and they covered the entire rocks. And what it was the mist from the water had frozen on these rocks, and it formed something that's called a rock blossom. So one of the children went to a smaller rock, and guess what? Picked off a blossom, put it in their pocket, and they just marveled at these beautiful white flowers that they saw on the rocks. And they walked past those, and they were now not on the top of the mountain, but they were in the foothills of the mountain. And there was something on the ground they'd never seen. It was white, but it was rolled up like a cinnamon roll on its side. Most of them were white or blue or turquoise, but some of them, they had a little brown in them and a few rocks. But what they were, they're called snow rollers. But in the middle was a hole. So the children got in, and remember, we're not on the mountain now, we're on the foothills where things will move slower. But what these snow rollers are made of is when the wind blows so hard that it takes a chunk of snow, throws it down on snow that's packing snow, and it begins to roll. And it gets bigger and bigger, and instead of a snowball, it turns into a roll, like a cinnamon roll. And it crawled into the inside of one, and down the side of the foothills they went, just as fast as they could, and they would they moved their bodies, they could steer it one way or another until they came down to a plateau. Well, that plateau really wasn't a plateau, it was the beach. They rolled right down to where the water came up to the edge, and they got out, and of course they were dizzy and laughing, and they had seen so many beautiful things that are real in nature that they never knew existed. And just as they were chattering away, here came Pegasus, running along the beach, up to them, dropped his wing, and onto his back they went. And they were just talking and so excited about everything they had seen. And as they went back and got over the van, whoosh, down over the top they went, and they were back in the van. And each of the children looked at each other and reached in their pockets. And one pulled out a rock blossom. And one pulled out a miniature snow roller. And one pulled out a miniature slide. Looked like a trinket that you put on a bracelet, just like before. And one of them had an evergreen tree that was shaped as a snow ghost. And then they put them back in their pockets and smiled with that knowing smile. Good night, children.